Yeah.
It's midnight tonight and it's in person.
I'll do that after the roll call.
Christine is the one that approved the TV.
Oh,
Who are you looking for specifically in the meeting?
I'm sorry.
Who are you looking for specifically in the
Jack
meeting?
Looney.
Yeah.
Jack Looney.
I guess that's right.
Jack Looney, can you hear us on Teams?
Yes.
Yeah, we have to get all of that.
Is that you, Jack?
I can hear you now, thank you.
Thank you. Christine, I guess we can call the roll.
Larry Porter.
Here.
Jack Looney.
Here,
Garland Land.
Here.
Joe Zack.
Here.
Mark McDonald.
Here.
David McDowell. Bridget McCandless. Here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
yes, I got a question for Sarah Carnes, Limpy. Sarah, it's been on social media today, or that we didn't get the posting for the agenda up within 24 hours of this meeting. I just wanted to make sure that we're not in violation of the sunshine law, and maybe someone could speak to where it was posted. It was not on the website agenda.
I know it was sent out via email, sorry. It was sent out via email in plenty of time, and I would have to check with the city clerk, but if Christina gave it to the city clerk in time, it was definitely put out via email 24 hours in advance. And Christina always gives a copy to the city clerk to be posted on the board that's in City Hall, and that is the official posting per state law. So if as long as it's on that board, it is noticed per state law.
Well, I guess the question is the city hall or the municipal court area, isn't that closed on Wednesday?
They have it posted on the doors.
Oh, it's posted on the doors. I haven't been over there in a while,
And it
so.
got posted between Denver and.
That's what it was saying in the social media, and that concerns me. I don't want to be a part of any violation if we know it.
Christina says it was posted between 4:30 and 5 on Monday on the doors of City
The
Hall.
door's outside.
Outside where the normal bulletin board is posted. So since the doors are closed and you can't approach the bulletin board, it's being posted on the door.
Okay.
So
Well,
it's
I
a
just want to
regular
let
place.
you know it's out there that it was
Okay.
not posted. So
Well, they're wrong.
I just want to make sure it's all out in the open and
Yep.
everything's good. Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, that being said, can I have a motion to approve the minutes for the last two meetings?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Dan had an issue with one of the meetings.
One of the meetings, it had notes that we had approved I think it was it said Sugar Creek. It was actually District 2 in Raytown. So I notified Christina to correct the minutes of that to that effect. So it's a pretty much a Scrivener's error, but anyway. Is that okay?
It's been corrected. Well, then we can approve it as corrected, okay? Now can I get a second?
Second.
Bridget seconds.
Yes, I have one thing, Mr. Chairman. On the September 22nd minutes, I'm a little concerned when we put on there that much discussion occurred. That's on.
See number one.
Yeah, under discussion, number one, much discussion ensued.
Typo.
Yeah, it's a definite typo, but that concerned me that, I guess you could watch the video, but I have a concern with us having minutes that are indicating that the discussion, we don't know what happened during that discussion, and I think it's important that we get it out more. We were able to get the motion after that, but much discussion, much discussion to discuss what? So I have a concern with that. I don't know how to remedy it either.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Christine.
in the past, In the past, the board has asked for us to narrow down the minutes as much as we could. There was some points we had like 8, 9, 10 more pages of minutes. So we've started doing that quite often if there's like a lot of discussion on one particular item, just like a lot of back and forth, especially since they have the meeting that can be viewed online. So if you guys would like to go back to the old way of doing the minutes, we can surely do that. It'll be a lot, just letting you know.
I think I can remedy this in a minute.
I mean, we've
Christine.
already got, the next one is like 4 or 5 pages.
Yeah, I think I can remedy this whole problem in a minute.
Mr. Chairman, a suggestion from past boards. Sometimes what they do is say much discussion ensued and they just put the topics in there, not all the give and take. So rates, whatever, rates, utility, stability, outages, whatever. And that way you know the topics that were discussed. You don't have to put in Mark said this and Larry said that. So it's a way to at least capture the topic breadth without having 9 pages of minutes. That's it, Jeff.
Mr. Chair, I
guess-
think that is probably normally the case. Usually this is on presentations or something that's being discussed at the time, and usually it's right underneath that item. And then there are topics usually listed there that we've discussed.
Okay,
Is that satisfy that, or do we need to change it a
Mr.
little
Chairman.
bit?
yes.
I guess Bridget's suggestion is fine with me, but what we have right now is we have part of the minutes are full, and then when you have a comment that we just had a discussion, that doesn't reflect anything towards what the discussion was about. So I'm good with what she's suggesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now can I have approval of the minutes? Call the roll.
Larry Porter,
Yes.
Jack Looney,
Yeah.
Garland Land,
Yes.
Joe Zack,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
No.
David McDowell,
Yes.
Bridget McCandless.
Yes.
Motion passed. All right, before we get started on the presentations, I have a little, and be it noted that I am not running for any public office, but I have a little speech. At our last meeting with the Power and Light, I have several words to describe it, none I can say in front of females. It was a cluster. I didn't like the way we cross-talked. We didn't see that. I went to the city charter, and this is the Public Utilities Advisory Board meeting. It's not a staff meeting. It's not a water department meeting, or the Power and Light meeting, or the water pollution meeting. It's a Public Utilities Advisory Board meeting. And we should be adult enough to control it as a meeting as professionals. So from now on, I would appreciate you address the chair if you want to speak, and don't interrupt the person speaking until after he's done, and then address the chair again. That may ease a little bit on the minutes of the meeting for Christine, so she knows who's talking. I didn't care for some of the presentations that were gone. I'm disappointed in some of the finer points on this list that we had. But from now on, we're going to run it according to the city charter. And the city charter says it's our meeting. It's not the staff's meeting. Now, if somebody's not is uncomfortable with that, I'm up for election in July. If you don't like the way I run the meeting, then vote me out. But that's what we're going to have to do, and that's the way we're going to run it. Because we act like a bunch of little kids with this cross-talking and interrupting somebody while they're trying to make a point. With that being said, I guess we're ready for the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Brian Kidney's going to provide a bit of an introduction to Chris with PFM. if he's
Also-
online.
I'm sorry, I'm crossed off. We don't have the board up on here, so we're gonna use your sheets that he gave you to follow him on this. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, nope, not a problem, sir. Yeah, is Brian available on Teams, please?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me okay, Adam. Chair, if you don't mind, I'll just give a quick introduction. If you recall, several months ago, we came to the UAB to talk about some potential refunding of some debt. During that discussion, there was a lot of questions about the level of fund balances, liquidity, and where we should be at on that fund balance level. And so we contracted with PFM, Public Finance Managers, and Chris Lover is with PFM, and he's here today to give a presentation. What he's going to present is pretty much, I guess I would say, best practices for how to come up with the right levels of fund balances for utility. And we really like the way that they've laid out and went through a really formulaic approach to balances. And we just like to share that with you. And then afterwards have a discussion about whether or not the PUAB would be interested in adopting this methodology on how we come up with fund balances for our utilities. So with that, I'll just pass it on to Chris.
Well, good afternoon. Hopefully, folks can hear me. This is the first time I've had to give a presentation with a mask on. As Brian mentioned, I'm Chris Lover from Public Financial Management. I was hired by the city to work with the 3 utility systems to serve as your fiduciary and as your municipal advisor. This is a project that we've done with probably half dozen to 10 other utilities from coast to coast. Focusing primarily on electric, but also many combined utility systems. And it gets after the question I think folks have been wrestling with here is how much cash is the right amount of cash? And is it too much? Is it too little? And what's it going to be used for? What types of risks or what other types of uncertainty do we need to address in our utility? So hopefully by the end of my presentation here, you'll have an understanding there's been some analytical rigor applied to a requirement that was built from the ground up to come up with a number. And that number, to kind of cut to the chase, is $67 million plus or minus 10%. So we come up with a target, and then we typically apply a bandwidth because it's kind of tough to hit a target when you're operating a big utility. But we set a bandwidth so that the utility can kind of fluctuate in and out of it. And that metric, meaning that bandwidth, becomes a metric that the PUAB, the city council, the utility staff use to drive their budget development. And if you're outside the bandwidth, whether you're too low, the idea is you come into the bandwidth over a couple of years. Typically, folks take 2 years or 3 years to come back into the bandwidth. Likewise, if they're over the bandwidth, take 2 or 3 years to come back into the bandwidth. But at least it gives folks some comfort that there's a reasoning, some rationale, and a process behind a number. And again, that number, $67 million plus or minus 10%. If we go to slide 2, this is just our agenda, really kind of how we're going to walk through this. If we go to slide 3, basically we talk about how this will do a foundation of our policy, and then we get into the good information starting on slide 4. So slide 4 is a summary of some big picture observations that PFM, in conjunction with staff, came up with of what's influencing the city as well as the overall market. And when I'm talking market, I mean the natural gas market. I mean the market you have in SPP, your transmission operator, basically, where you operate on a day-to-day basis, buying and selling power. So it's an idea of what is your economic landscape and operational landscape. So on this slide here, utilities require nice cash reserves. The idea here is it's going to address risks that might materialize over the course of a year. Why do we do that? Because we want our customers to have some rate stability. And why do we do that? Because it also allows for a solid credit rating. And you know from hopefully your experience that Standard & Poor's rates you guys an A+, which is a very nice rating. What we do is we look across revenues and expenses, and we say, at what point do revenues not materialize to address costs? At what point do expenses come in higher than forecast, so we then have to cover those? We do. What is our capital, our working capital levels, and also what type of capital reserve do we have to address the normal type of renewal and replacement most utilities have to do? In addition to this type of policy, there are other ways that you can look at cash reserve or risk management. One is what type of budgeting practices are done here at IPL or at the city, and we found through our work with them very conservative practices. You can also use insurance to cover some risks, for example, cyber insurance if you have some type of cyber problems or you're concerned about cyber threats. You can hedge, meaning you could do interest rate hedges. You could do power hedges and natural gas hedges to take care of commodity risk. And finally, you can borrow dollars when you don't want to use big amounts of cash, for example, for a capital project. On our slide number 5, we thought it would be helpful to talk about, well, how much cash does IPL have? And not only that, how much cash is actually available? So here we kind of walk the dog from the top of the chart down to the bottom. And number 1 shows where your cash balance was for IPL at the end of the fiscal year. So 30th of June, 2020, you had about $102 million. If you round up, it's actually $103 million. You then have some funds that are restricted by legal covenants. So these are basically covenants that the city and IPL has made for a debt service reserve fund. So you can't have access to those for an emergency. So you subtract that from the $103 million, you get down to about $86.5 million. Then there are some funds that you really don't have access to. For example, you have customer advance payments. So that's basically customers have paid in advance for certain things, so you can't really use that money because you got to pay for the power in a couple of months that's going to be provided by those. So we subtract that out, and that gets you to a level of about $82.9 million. So I think the statistic we have here on the little bumper sticker at the bottom is that about 20% of your cash balances really aren't available. So instead of 103 million, you really have about 82.9 million that you can use. On our next slide, we really talk about this bottom-up review across those same areas I mentioned before: revenue risk, expense risk, working capital, and capital.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
when could we ask questions? Should we wait till after the presentation?
That's up to the presenter. What do you think?
Well, Mr. Chair, whatever, I'm fine with it in any way. If we want to get the questions out now, that's fine. I might just say I'll answer that in 3 slides or 5 slides.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
I guess the first question was, who requested this analysis? Is this just the PUAB that requested it or made it the request, or did someone at the city council level request it? I just wanted to, I think it's a great analysis. I just want to know how it initiated. And is this going to be something that our other utilities are also going to be receiving? And the last question is, how much does this cost our ratepayers for this analysis?
So this is Brian again on the call. First of all, this came out of a discussion that we had with the PUAB, the staff in PUAB. I'm not sure, I don't recall if it was specifically requested from PUAB. However, as we were going into the refundings, we felt that it was important to understand the level of balances that we did have. The second question was, yes, all 3 utilities will have the same fund balance analysis. And then, Chris, you might have to help me on the cost of each particular study. I don't recall the actual cost of this one. However, I will say this is part of the analysis that we feel needs to go into the debt refunding, and it is going to be treated as cost of the financing itself. But Chris, if you know offhand.
Yeah, offhand, I think it's for this one study here, it's $50,000. This is a a bulk of work. And then for the other systems, it really steps down to, I think it's 15,000 for the next study and maybe 10 for the next, because some of the material applies to it.
So I guess my next question is to Adam and Brian. Was this a staff thing that approved the $50,000? I'm not sure.
So the city manager has the purchasing authority to purchase up to $100,000. But as Brian mentioned, as part of the refinancing that this utility has $152 million of outstanding debt. So this analysis is part of that exercise as we go through all these refinancing and refundings. This is part of that work that has to be done regardless.
Was this done before they made the decision to refinance?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
Was the analysis done so we could determine that we have, I don't know, $15.7 million that we could have paid off that $10 million bond? Was it known before we decided to go ahead? And I don't know if we've already decided or we've already refinanced. I don't know. Maybe Mr. Kidney would be able to tell us.
So yeah, this project and the refunding project were, I would say, in parallel. We were going forward with the refunding and this analysis at the same time.
It's just concerning to me that we went ahead and did a refunding on something we had an opportunity. Instead of saving $2.5 million, we could have saved $5 million on, or $4.9 million on. But thank you for answering the questions. Appreciate it.
I think there'll be an example later about how this microphone was flashing very strangely a second ago, so I didn't know if it was going to blow up or what. There's a discussion item later on in this presentation that'll speak to your question, I think, a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
And I think to clarify, IPL has not done anything to refund the first series of bonds. We're in the process of looking at the options that have come across back to us, back to our desk, and doing analysis of what is that savings based on those rates. So nothing's been enacted in terms of a refunding of the 2010 bonds nor the 2012 bonds.
So is it your firm that would make that decision or would do the refinancing?
We don't do the refinancing. Again, we're not a bank. We don't do the refunding. We're not a bank. We're here to serve, again, as your advisors, your fiduciary, figure out who can do this for you the most economical way. And if you want to put money into that transaction, what are the overall impacts? So we don't sit there on the other side of the transaction and say we're also the banker. We're the advisor.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so I think if we move on, slide 7 is just observation and trends, and then we get into kind of the big picture items of what we kind of uncovered here. And believe it or not, number one, COVID-19 permeates the entire study. There is a ton of economic uncertainty, and if you read the CDC guidelines, kind of reinforced today about don't go anywhere for Thanksgiving, and there's those types of things, you can get an idea of what's going to happen, or what's happening or might not happen in that sense. When we talk about our federal programs, some have been very helpful, primarily through the Federal Reserve, and their actions on really keeping interest rates low and acting as that lender of last resort, so very low interest rate environment. But we don't know when some new stimulus will come, especially with kind of the turmoil around the election. And finally, what is our recovery going to look like and how long will it last, or how long will it take to get there? Is it this K-shaped recovery where you have some haves and have-nots? Is it a Nike swoosh recovery where we come back into a nice slow growth? Or is it more like a W where you're up and down depending on the news cycle and where you are with the vaccine? And we'll see COVID-19 mentioned throughout this report here. I would say, and that would argue that you would have a higher reserve, that uncertainty. The next group of things would higher, you might have a lower reserve. And when you look at Independence as a town, you have some very stable stable employment rates. So you have a lot of people working here. Now your unemployment rate went from 4% before the pandemic to about 12, and now it's down about 6. But you could see a very quick spike, and you drive around here and you see a lot of folks on street corners, and you realize some people have jobs and some people do not have jobs. You have some consistent but slow economic growth. 1, 2, 3% a year. Very strong customer base, very large percentage of commercial and residential customers really make up a solid 90% of your overall revenue. And finally, your largest 12 customers, it doesn't really look like they've changed. I've looked at this over 20 years, going year to year to year, and basically they're all the same, plus or minus a couple name changes. It's a very solid customer base here in the town. Again, this middle category argues for a lower reserve. Then you go down to the bottom one, challenges remain. Your median income's pretty low. That hires for a higher reserve, so you don't have to pass through costs quickly to your customers and kind of hurt their lifestyle. The unemployment is a bit elevated, and if you look back at the Great Recession back in 2008, 9, and 10, you had some big shocks to your sales at that point in time, where you had a downturn that was 6%, and conversely, a few years later, you're up at 7% for growth. So a big whipsaw. But the Great Recession did see about 6% of a contraction here in the economy. So if there aren't any questions, yes, sir?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I notice you're on the large customers. The City of Independence is not listed as a customer, as a large customer, and I assume that they would be of the size that they should be listed on that report. Is there some reason why they're not on there?
Those are pulled from your continuing disclosure reports, which are posted annually by the city, basically the agreement that you make with your bondholders. And I did notice there's a water sewer element on there, but I didn't see some of the other elements. I'm not sure specifically why.
I think the water is because we buy electricity from Evergy. Is there some reason why? That's the question I have. Why isn't Independence, Missouri on here? If we're giving them a large industrial user rate, I would think they should show up on our large customers. But I'd like to see how that has trended over the 10-year period too.
I think if you have your packet, if you have the complete packet, there's slide 35, which should list out all the top 12 customers. Starts in the year 2000, goes to 2010, and then down at the bottom, basically 2020. So that's the whole list of folks that are in your continuing disclosure. And again, the only one I noticed that jumped out as a city element was the sewer.
Is this a report that the city put together, a list, or is this a report that you got from another source, data source?
This is a source that your city has published on EMA, which is the Securities and Exchange Requirement, basically.
Okay, so the city did.
Yes, city did.
Okay. I guess the question would be to the city manager. Adam, I don't understand why we're not on here.
That's something we'll have to get back to you on. My guess is the municipal rate was approved this last rate study, so that may be why it's not included in one of these categories here. But I'm making a big assumption there.
They went back to 2000.
Right, but I believe the municipal rate category was approved in this latest rate structure.
Right.
Right. So this report is probably this reflects probably 2019 numbers. So it would not have reflected the municipal rate, which was approved this spring. So I'm making an assumption. I'll have to get back to you. So I'm just.
Well, can we get I'd like to make a request that we get how much the electric charge to the city has been during the same time period.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, starting on top of slide 9. This is, so if the previous slide was what's going on in Independence, slide 9 is what's going on in the energy markets and commodity markets that are influential. First of all, natural gas prices drive this market, whether it's the purchase of natural gas for a gas-fired plant or whether it is just buying power in the SPP marketplace. But the cost of natural gas drives that market. So natural gas prices, primarily due to fracking and our energy policy, have reached kind of record lows. If you look back about a decade ago, natural gas was $7 per MMBTU, and now it's about a little over $4 per MMBTU. But again, driving your market, your energy markets and your gas markets. I'd say the second big bullet here is that your participation in the integrated marketplace in particular what we call SPP, has really lowered the overall cost of electricity. And again, the costs are called LMPs for locational marginal pricing, which is what's the regional price for a megawatt hour of electricity. Those prices are very volatile, but they've also come down, just like we've seen the natural gas prices fall down. So in 2014, $33 a megawatt hour, and now in this year, 2020, about $20 a megawatt hour. So again, prices falling, but very interestingly, we see the same amount of volatility for both natural gas and LMP prices. So smaller cost, same volatility, actually more risk. I would say finally your coal units have been, they're dispatched pretty heavily, but not as much as they have been in the past. So they're dispatching into the SPP marketplace. About the year 2012 is close to 90%. Now it's down to closer to 70%. So they're not as active again because they're not natural gas fired. They're fired by coal, but they're still pretty active for IPL and the community here. When we get to renewable energy, the cost of renewable energy is coming down, but in many instances you have some higher price renewable energy. Missouri in all doesn't have a huge penetration by wind or solar as much as we see in other regions, particularly out west in California or down south in Florida, or even up north in Minnesota. Much higher renewable penetration compared to this region right here. And finally, you go back to COVID and COVID impacts, and overall electricity demand is down about 5 to 10% across the country, whatever region you talk to, whether it is what we call MISO, which is north of you, or SPP, which is here. But in general, loads are down just because, a lot of uncertainty with primarily your commercial sectors of business. So any questions on kind of the observations? And again, if you look through the slides, they're like numbered 30 through 35, 36. It has a ton of backup information. And a lot of the statistics I quoted, I just pulled from there so we wouldn't have to go back and forth between those slides.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
do you anticipate increasing volatility in the natural gas market, or you think, there's lots of change in fracking and coal sands, and just question about whether that is so uncertain we should expect a lot of volatility?
I think we can expect volatility, but it's difficult to predict which way the price levels will move. The big thing for me is you have a new administration. New administration partially built on a Green New Deal. You had President-elect Biden talking about fracking or not fracking during the debates. So you wonder what's going to happen to those natural gas prices. Obviously, with no fracking, it's a real supply and demand imbalance. Prices will go up. So it makes me wonder about what direction that's heading. I don't see that happening on January 25th, a few days after he's in office. But still, one of the first things President Trump did was rescind the Clean Power Plan that the Obama administration put in place, primarily dealing with coal plants. And I could see the Biden administration saying, let's just go back to all that work we did. Because it was 4 years of work to put that together, just saying it was approved back under the Obama administration. It's coming back into effect now. So I think that's a little uncertainty that's going to influence natural gas prices.
Thank you.
So if there are any other questions on those areas, we're going to get into kind of the meat of the risk analysis. And if you go to slide 11, the first thing we really did was we looked at what are the fixed costs of the utility. If you go into their income statement, you'll see a bunch of lines of information, and you have to ask yourself, gee, if we didn't provide we provided half our load to our customers, which one of those costs go away and which don't? So which ones are based on volume and which ones just kind of happen? So what we did is if you look on the chart to the table up on the right, the colored sand chart, well, you have a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes back to the city, that's fixed. You have debt service and coverage, so I have to meet that legally, that's fixed. And then you look at all your other fixed and variable expenses. And after talking with basically the accounting folks down at IP&L, we came to this conclusion here that about 95% of your O&M is fixed and about 5% is actually variable. So you can have some control, meaning loads come down, demand comes down, there's not as much need for electricity. Well, you're still going to have about 95% of those costs. And that's what the sand chart reflects, that of any given dollar that goes out the door from IPL, about 85% of that pays a fixed cost. So your ability to come in and do a lot of cost cutting takes a huge strategic push and change. It can't just happen
Mr.
by
Chairman.
magically like doing a papal blessing and saying, let's cut some O&M costs, because a lot of them are contractually difficult to do, at least in the short term.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I've got a question. Did you look any further out from 2019? We've had probably 50% of our operation of IPL has been shut down. We closed down the plant at Blue Valley, I think officially this year. So I guess my question, Mr. Nail, is do you know what that fixed cost will be by the year end from 85 million? What kind of number are we looking at? That should be an advantage to us. Should be major cost reductions.
Well, I can tell you that the largest part of our budget is our purchase power, and following that is our transmission and distribution operation, the ongoing maintenance. That's the largest share of our operating expenses. So the reduction from the closing of the power plant, I'd have to get back to you with what we think the change is going to be. I know that specific cost center was cut in about half, but what its percentage is of the overall budget, I'd have to get back to you.
So instead of, if you had 40 people there, now we're down to 20. Is that what you're saying?
No, I said the cost center, the dollars.
Yes.
The dollars in the budget were cut by about half.
Okay.
But what that percentage is of the overall budget, it would be smaller because it's only one piece of the operation.
I'd be very interested to see what that number is for 2020. Thank you.
So if you look at the bottom portion of the slide, number we really use as an argument for our next two areas of risks is that fixed cost that you're going to have to cover, and then we applied a minor inflation factor, so it comes up to about $124 million.
We got a
in fixed
question,
costs.
please.
I'm having a hard time following. We're looking at the page numbers on this handout, and you're referring to a different page.
Is the page number? It should have shown up on the handout.
Yeah. What page are you talking about?
This is slide 11, called allocation of fixed and variable costs.
Yeah.
And it's got if you're a
We're
Florida
looking at a
Gators fan,
page
it looks like
down here. It says, I'm not sure I'm following you. Where's page 11 at?
Slide number right there. So it's here. There you go. That's the slide.
Where's that page number at?
It's right there underneath the
It's
staple.
underneath the staple. Okay. So that's why I couldn't find it. It's underneath the staple. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we're going to use this $124 million, which recommends the true fixed cost of the utility for the next two slides and the next two risk categories. So really, if you go to slide number 12, called revenue risk, general sales decrease, economic recession, this is a measurement of macro risk. What happens to our big economy, whether big economy is national, global, state, Independence, KC metro area, but what happens if there's some type of recession here? So the table you see on slide 12 is a common one we'll show for the rest of this presentation. So I can just orient you to it for a bit. As you go down the left-hand side, we have kind of just a discussion of what the items are. It comes down to that bottom line of what's the cash to address it. So how much cash do we put aside into this reserve to address, in this case, a big recession? We have a less conservative level, which is a lower amount of cash, and all the way to the right-hand side, which is your more conservative level, so putting more dollars against it because you think it might be a higher probability event or a higher risk event. So with this table, we start off at that fixed cost of $124 million from the previous slide. We then say that there's an assumed variance in sales that can address this $124 million. The variance explanation talks about why we picked 2%, or if you go to the middle column, 4%, or you go to the last column, 6%. Well, that last column is what you actually saw in the 2009 Great Recession, a 6% reduction. We then do a math step here. It's $124 million times 6% for 12 months. So you cover it for a full year, meaning maybe the recession only lasts a year, or maybe we can address it in the next budget cycle. And that says, in this case, we should reserve about $7.4 million for this risk. Under discussion, you could see some rationale of why this was selected. And this is something we've seen with several studies we've done this year, is where we're going to the right on these cash balances primarily due to COVID, meaning we're getting more conservative because we just don't know where we're going to end up in 6 months or a year or 2 years.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
can I ask a question? So I understand that this risk in terms of the COVID. So let's assume that we get out of COVID next year or year after, whatever. Would you still project that we should have the same conservative risk factor 2 or 3 years from now, because we may have another recession, or would this analysis should be updated, or would you say that we would continue with the same type of risk analysis?
I think that this reflects kind of a very concerning environment for the next, call it, 12 months to 24 months. And I think there might be a time where you reassess it and say, well, how are things doing in the Independence area, Kansas City Metroplex, the region? And that might cause you to move more to the left. I will say we completed a study in February and March for another client, and they said, we don't know what's going on with this COVID thing. Let's come back in 9 months and revisit this. We'll take more conservative now. And then maybe we just do a quick check-in and say, do we still feel that's the right level, or if things stabilized and we can go back kind of more towards the moderate level. But that's how some of my clients are electing to look at that COVID risk.
So your suggestion is that probably we ought to stick with what your recommendation here is for a couple of years.
Well, I would say finger on the pulse, see what's going on, at least probably a year. Most of my clients revisit this study every 3 years, 4 years. Say, where are we now? What are new risks that have arisen, and what risks we think we're going to rise just didn't show up?
Thank you.
All right, so slide 12, we start off with $7.4 million for this reserve, and then we'll go to our next slide. And the idea here is that this is now kind of the microeconomic risk of the region. So you have the macro risk. Previously, this one represents a loss of one of those top 12 customers. In a second, I'll tell you what else it represents. So same math step here, $124 million. We now say you lose, if you go to the cash to address this, you lose your smallest of your top 12, and then you reserve that. If that's the real risk we think is here, reserve 0.3 million. And if you're going to lose one of those top guys, the top few people, that's $2.5 million. Here we said, let's go with 2.5 million. And for a few reasons. Again, we hear COVID. The second thing is as you are a utility staff, how do you monitor the top 12? Do you know that Unilever is going to be here for 5 years? Do you have some way, shape, or form through the Better Business Bureau or some way to know that that company is going to be around for a while? Some issuers do, some don't. And you see a lot of consolidation in some of these industries where folks just leave pretty quickly, and then you're kind of left holding the bag. I will say, I think of this now, this risk area, as this thing called distributed generation. Meaning, what is the likelihood one of your top 12 basically turns to the general manager and says, I have a plan to get renewable energy, all my own facilities, and I don't need you anymore. And that might be the bigger risk. I mean, think about the Costco's and the Walmarts and the Sam's Clubs would have that whole huge open space, that roof space, and the big parking lots. That then becomes a solar park for them. Rooftop solar or canopy solar out in the, in the parking lot. So I think that's what's really the risk. Isn't so much that one of these guys are going to leave, given kind of the consistency and look at the names in those lists, but it's also the idea that they might get their energy from somewhere else. If you think about Walmart, I looked this up this morning, their renewable goal is 50% renewable by 2025, and they're currently at 30% for this year. So they have some really strong renewable goals. And you wonder, you're going to start seeing rooftop solar come around here. So really, I think this risk measures two different things. One of those customers picking up and leaving, or they kind of figure out, we got to find our energy that's more green. And I can't maybe do it with IPL, I got to do it on my own. So on this risk, we say it's about $2.5 million to address the loss of one of those customers. Again, loss or distributed generation. And as a running total now, when you look at these last two risks, we're up to about $10 million, $9.9 million so far for the reserve. I'm going to keep building it up. If there are any questions on that, we'll go to slide 14, which is off-system sales. All right, so slide 14, this represents basically the ability for IPL to sell power into the market. When you sell power into the market, basically you're making money, so you're generating profit, and that profit can essentially go to cover other bills and just kind of boost the coffers of the utility. So this risk measures, well, how much do you rely on that profit, and what happens if it doesn't show up? So here we say, on average, about $5 million of off-system sales are done by IPL. We also say, on average, there's about a 20% margin. So about $1 million of off-system sales is gravy. Can cover other items that the utility might need to do. And then on the bottom part of the table, we say, well, what happens if power prices fall or costs rise and that margin is at 20%? It's lower. It's 10% down to 5%. And at the end of the day, we said, okay, that's not, which level do we pick? And here we decided, okay, let's just go with 0. And the reason why is that when we talk with IPL and their budget team and the city's budget team, they really don't put a number in here in the budget for this. They don't sit there and go, we're going to make $10 million this year on off-system sales. It's going to be a very conservative number. So you address this already in your budget process. So instead of saying, let's go to the middle, let's just make the 0 and say, we'll see what happens in a few years if you have more efficient plants that come online and become more reliant on this. I have seen other utilities that bank on, we need to generate $10 million of revenue to get $5 million or whatever the number is to help kind of subsidize the system. And sometimes when that doesn't work out, it's big problems. Here, I don't think it's a problem. If there's no questions on that, we'll go to our next revenue risk, which is interest income. So again, this is something called gravy, basically a way that the utility could bring some extra money in by prudent investment policies. When you look at how much you have to invest, it's close to $100 million. And basically, as we've reached a slow interest rate environment due to COVID and Federal Reserve action, will the utility be able to reinvest these funds that are coming? They're coming for a rollover. Will they be able to reinvest them for the rates they saw back in 2019? Which are about a percent and a half higher. So again, due to COVID and Federal Reserve action, we haven't seen interest rates rise. They're actually falling and plummeting. So it's just like you're probably thinking about refinancing your house, the same applies here. You're not going to see as much investment income. And here we said it's going to be a prolonged period of time. So that $100 million probably won't be reinvested at 1.5%. It'll be reinvested at closer to 0.5%. And this is going to go on for about a year and even longer if the Federal Reserve's comments are to believe. So here we say we should reserve $1 million for this, just to address this type of income that is coming in, that's planned on, more so than the previous slide. And that's why we selected the more conservative level. I will say there was one typo in your packet. I think that first bullet says 83 million, and it didn't match the table, so we just made it match the table. So it's $99 million is the correct amount. And that's the one kind of material change to the whole packet that was done over the past couple of days. So now our running total on this reserve is about $11 million. Now, if there aren't any other questions, we'll go into the expense side. So we're done with revenue at 11 million. Now we're going to expense. And again, a lot of this deals with market exposure, natural gas, and what those LMP prices are. So the locational marginal price of power. This one here is called unplanned outage. So this is what happens if one of your plants basically explodes. And you're probably saying, well, how often does that happen? Well, I could point to 2 instances in 5 years where we had a southern Minnesota lost their entire baseload unit for 2.5 years. I could point to Holland, Michigan, that had a 1-year-old plant where they probably had a 6-month outage for whatever reason. They couldn't quite figure it out, but it was shut down for 6 months. So this is a loss of a major unit that's in the power portfolio. And here we're saying it's Nebraska City too.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I've got a question. Where did these numbers come cash to address? I mean, I'm not an expert in this at all, but if Nebraska City or ITAN or Dogwood or whatever it was called down there blew up, $1.3 million isn't going to cover anything. I mean, I don't know, where do all these numbers come that says cash to address?
Okay, I can
How's
answer
that number
question. So
put together?
think of the cash to address as how much you have a budgeted amount for power in the budget. Now, there's a set number that's done by the whole staff, comes before the PUAB and the city council, and they bless off on that amount. And in there, you're buying a certain amount of megawatt hours or a certain amount of gas, something you're buying. So this is just saying it's going to be over and above that amount.
Right.
Okay, so you're going to, you have a means to address the majority of this problem through your budgeting process. We're just saying, well, you might want to be conservative and say, if I have to go into the market suddenly because I don't have my power plant generating power, if I go in at the wrong time, gas prices might be higher, or those LMPs, that price of power might be higher. It might be a cold Arctic day. I might have to come up with the extra dollars to address that. So this is already in the budget. So this amount you see, the cash to address would be the expense shock, the higher price.
I guess my question, did you pick it up off a chart that said less conservative would be 0.2 and more conservative would be $1 million?
So this follows the math step. So let's go look at the more conservative level. Okay, so your Nebraska City unit is responsible for 57 megawatt hours. That's essentially the capacity of it. Okay, we're going to assume this outage, this is what it can produce if it's going 100% of the time. We're going to assume you have a 90-day problem to fix, so 1 quarter it's out. And then basically, historically, that plant is working at 90%. And so, it's not available 24 hours a day, it's available 23 hours a day and producing power for you. Okay, so you do that math step, 57 megawatts times 90 days times 90%. That gets you how many megawatt hours it would have produced. So that's how you get the 110,000 megawatt hours. Then, after discussions with IPL, basically the way that plan is run, if you found out you've lost the plant for a month, they have a whole team that will sit there and go, well, let's go into the power market, into SPC, SPP, and we will now contract out for power. Okay, so we're going to hedge. We're going to buy 50% of the need because we don't want to be exposed to market risk. We don't want to be in the market buying like today, power I need tomorrow. So you could get these bilateral agreements or other agreements that just say, I want power for 1 month at this level, or 2 months at this level, and 3 months at this level. So for this analysis, we said there's some smart people up there. They're going to say, of this need of 110,000 megawatt hours, half of it is going to be hedged and purchased forward. The other half, I have to go into the market and buy. So now you have a remainder of 55,000 megawatt hours. You're now in the market buying. So today I got to buy that power for tomorrow. So the question becomes, well, what's the price? And as we talked about, LMP prices have come down to that 20-ish level, but the standard deviation is just as high as before. And we have all the data from IPL where we examined weekdays, weekends, on-peak times, off-peak times, and we have a standard deviation we could point to and say, on any given weekday during peak times, this is the standard deviation or the risk of an LMP price. And that's the number you see here. 2 standard deviations, so how big is the risk? And the standard deviation was $12 a megawatt hour for a weekday peak. So a day like today, where maybe it's colder than we expect and the price of power is that much higher. We do that math step, and that comes up to the $1.3 million. So this is all multiplication and algebra. More multiplication, sometimes addition. But we think this is prudent because, again, you've decommissioned several plants, and you have a lot of exposure to our natural gas market and our SPP marketplace. So we think it makes sense to go towards the right-hand side on this one, really not so much for COVID, but because of exposure to this broader market you're in. So that gets our reserve level, $12.5 million. Now, on this next one, it's called a planned outage. So what we see some folks do is we know we're going to take a plant down for maintenance. It's almost like your car has to go in the shop for a week, and you're going to go rent a car for the week. And sometimes people say, well, let me put $50 a month aside so I could pay for the rent-a-car. And some people are like, I just need to rent a car. And how do I get it? And then they're strapped for cash. So we don't want to be strapped for cash. We want to see people ramp into a known outage, where they can buy that power they have to replace. But after talking with IPL staff, this really isn't a big risk at all. They plan for it, and really your outages are pretty small, and it's a really small amount of power we're talking about here. So we say 0 on this one. All right, slide 18 is natural gas expense. What's your natural gas exposure? So again, as an idea of what the risk is, or magnitude, about 5 years ago, we calculated you were buying about 400,000 MMBTUs of gas. Now you're buying 1.5 million. So a tremendous increase. So again, that illustrates your exposure to the natural gas market. And again, we take that baseline 1.5 million MMBTUs. We look at historical standard deviations, the observed variability, and we say on the less conservative side, well, in any given year, it's about 90 cents. Standard deviation is a measure of risk. On other years, it's $1.75 basically. So again, thinking about how that volume of gas has almost tripled from 400, 800, 12, now 15, 1.5 million MMBTUs, we said this is definitely an exposure that has increased over time for you. So let's go to the right-hand side on this one and take $2.6 million of additional cash above your budget to say this is what we need to address this risk. Now, when we add it all up, we're now up to about $15 million for this reserve, for this cash level. Our next slide, slide 19, power purchases and capacity purchases. So this is market purchases of megawatt hours. Again, increasing over time. In your financials, it's called purchased energy and capacity. And basically, we look at the price of, again, these LMPs and what the change in those costs were, like a standard deviation. We do the math step here, and again, we come up with about 8.7. So we took the more conservative level here, and the reason why we just said let's not go to the 10.4. We think the SPP marketplace for power has been working pretty efficiently. So maybe it's something we say let's go more the moderate level, and then we'll just see how it shakes out over the next year or 2 years. If we feel it's more volatile because of market prices, maybe we move to the right. We felt that a moderate level was more conducive to it. Also, because a large component of that total is a capacity purchase. We're not buying energy, you're just basically buying the ability to get energy. And that market's pretty liquid and it's not as volatile as the actual energy market. So that's why we went with the middle level compared to just the right-hand side. And walking the dog, that total now for cash balance is about $24 million across all these risk areas. Slide 20 is renewable energy risk. So this is something we've seen with a bunch of clients up north primarily. And this is what happens if the wind blows too hard and the sun shines too much. And you have a very nice renewable asset, but a lot of times those renewable assets are expensive. They're more expensive than a megawatt hour generated by coal or natural gas. So you guys have Smoky Hills, you have your independent solar. Those are a little more expensive than the market price. So if the wind blows too hard, you got to take that. You can't just say, I don't want it because it's too expensive. It's not like Burger King. You can't have it your way. It just comes to you. So with those, we said, what's the risk in addition to what you budgeted? And here we said the typical capacity factor. So how often do these things work? Is about 36%. So on any given day, your wind turbine is going to work 36% of the day. Your solar panels will generate energy 36% of the day. And the risk is, what if it's higher than 36? You haven't budgeted for it. And here we're saying it's gone up by about 4%. And we've run through the whole stack of the renewable portfolio of IPL. You get about 46.5 megawatts of renewable capacity here. And that difference, if the sun shines too much, and it's only about $0.3 million. It's not a big risk. But we have seen some folks where their expensive wind farms are generating 55%, primarily up in the Dakotas and eastern Minnesota. So that cash balance now ekes up a little higher. It's about $24.5 million. And our next two areas are really the big gorillas that influence the overall level. So slide 21 talks about working capital. And basically, if you look at our chart here, it says that, what does it take to run the utility on a day? What's the expenses per day? And when you look at your operating expenses and some of the other items, such as your debt service and your coverage and your payment in lieu of taxes, basically just to keep the lights on or open the door, it's $340,000 a day to run IPL. We then say, well, how many days should you just have? So I like to think of this as the CFO, the general managers, kind of I sleep well at night amount, because this is just what it costs to run the operation. So 30 days, when we think about how do you bill, IPL can generate a megawatt hour on the first of the month. They bill, call it the end of the month, then that customer doesn't have to pay the bill for 30 days later. So that's 60 days. We've already incurred the cost, burning the coal, the natural gas, the employees, the health benefits, everything else. You might not see the dollar from your customer for at least 60 days. So in this one, we say 60 days is the minimum. And then given kind of the uncertainty of COVID, are people going to pay their bills? And what's going to happen there? We probably need to go to 90. And that makes sense given our environment and just the facts of a billing cycle. So here we go on the more conservative level.
I have a question. Did you, this 90 days, did you come up with it in your analysis of this, or did the city tell you that they're already at 93 days?
No, this was just, I don't want to say our standard template, but when we've done this study with other folks, this is typically the buckets we use. 30, 60, 90. I think it's easily understandable. 1, 2, or 3 months. But the city didn't say, hey, adjust that to we want a bigger number of days there. This is just what we've used with other folks.
That's what I'm saying. Didn't we go to 90 before this, Adam? Jim?
So the financial documents that you get each month show a 63-day reserve, which is in accordance with city council policy right now. And then there's an additional amount that's our management recommended, which is based off of best practices, which brings it to 90 days.
That's what I thought. We are already at 90 days. Is that right?
It shows that on our financial statements that we're reserving 90 days.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Is there any way you can give us a breakdown of that $340,000 a day? How much of that is pilot versus other expenses?
Yeah, you can almost go back to, the slide. It doesn't have it printed out on here, but if you look at slide number 11, fixed versus variable expenses, and you just take a slice of that and look up from the year 2019, that's your general breakdown. So 10% is pilot, call it the next 8% to 10% is debt service and coverage. Then you got about 55, 60% of fixed, and then the rest is variable. So it's basically taking a slice of that sand chart.
So just divide that by 365?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so this gets that cash balance level up to close to $55 million. So if there are any questions on working capital, the next one is actual capital, a renewal and replacement level. And this is what type of projects, construction projects, are planned by IPL, or what should you think of, how should you think about this? And the interesting thing with the capital reserve, many utilities establish a certain level of this, and the question is what should that be? Now, the first thing that PFM does is we look at what is your depreciation expense per year? So we can go to your income statement and say, look, there's a depreciation expense, which is measured against all your assets as you depreciate them over time. And when we look at IPL, that number ranges from $13 million to about $20 million a year. So if you're going to put a CPA hat on, you'd say, well, I need to at least reserve $13 million to $19-20 million a year just to address the book value loss of my assets, right? The depreciation you're taking against everything you've built or put in service. The other thing we look at, since that's just an accounting entry, is what has IPL actually done and executed? Because if I give you $20 million and you've only executed $15 million in a year, and there's this $5 million difference, which tells me that level of capital projects are kind of hard to do. You can't really jam it all into a year. So we looked at what had been executed, and that number has actually ranged from about $16 million to about $5 to $6 million a year. So some big variability. So what we determined here is on the table, well, the on the far right side, the maximum or the more conservative level, which was that maximum depreciation. Well, that's a book entry. That's what accountants like to see. Doesn't really reflect reality sometimes. Let's cross that off the list. We go down to the less conservative level, the minimum that you've executed over a period of time. Well, that's about $10 million. And that's less than what your lowest depreciation expense was. And that kind of brought us to the middle. You know, the moderate level, about $12.5 million, $12.6 million. And we said, that seems to make sense. Let's see what you've executed. And it falls within the range of what you've executed, and it falls within the range of your depreciation expense. So it seemed to strike a nice balance. And that's why that one was selected. And that gets that total of this cash balance level to the $67 million I first started out with. So the question comes, on slide 23, we have a summary, and it looks like a nice chart with the green and the white. So the greens reflect the levels that we said were recommended. And what we like to say is just don't go down the columns and add them up. We just don't take the most conservative on the right-hand side and say you should have $78 million. We think we've done a decent job of saying what's the probability and reality that some of these will happen, won't happen, and let's just not go to the right or the left. Let's just kind of figure out what's the prudent thing to do. And that's where we got to the 67 level, $67 million. When we do the math step on this, that comes out to 209 days cash. And this is important from a rating agency perspective, which we'll see in a minute. And then I mentioned a bandwidth, plus or minus 10%. So now we take that $67 million, we add 10%, we subtract 10% of that, we say your bandwidth is now 60 million to 73.7. So 60 million to $74 million that you should be able to operate in without really too much concern. On our next slide, which is 24, we go back to what is the cash available to address the $67 million. So this first part of the slide, the top part of this chart you've seen, down to the green line that says amount unrestricted and available. What we've added here is the bottom part, which is the cash balance targets, along with your upper bound and your lower bound. And then on the right-hand side, it says available, and this is the amount above the target. So if we're just taking the target, you're about 15.9 million above target. If you look at the highest upper bound, you're only about 10 million cash balance currently above target. If you take that lower bound, that jumps up to $22 million. But in either case, your current cash levels are above the target. We would say maybe do something about that, and that's probably left for further discussion at some point. But we think we built this to address the risks of the utility in discussions with the city, in discussions with IPL. It's something that it shows some analytical rigor. It shows some reality of COVID, and we think it's a number you could hang your hat on when you go to talk to the rating agencies. So when we go to the next slide, unless there's a question.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have one question.
Yes.
Between the bandwidths, the lower target and upper bandwidth, any place in between there, will that adversely affect our investability to bond ratings or anything like that?
I can get to that question in the next one or two slides.
Okay, thank you.
So our next slide, on slide 25, comparable utilities, this gets to the question of what does everyone else do? Or what do some similarly sized utilities like IPL, what do they do? So left-hand side, you have about 15 folks, 20 folks who are similarly sized utilities based on operating revenue. And we filled out as much information as we could. Some of these folks don't have any debt, so they don't have any really reporting requirements to anybody. So it's difficult to track some of this information for certain utilities. So what we did, we then went to their ratings reports if they have ratings. We then went to their financials if they had financials, and basically filled this out as best we could. So you're up at the top with this new days cash level, comes out to 209 days cash. And if you compare it to other folks, I'll point out Clarksville Department of Electricity in Tennessee, they have 112 days cash, but they're rated higher than you, 2 notches higher than you. Likewise, you go to Rochester, Minnesota, Rochester Public Utilities, 263 days, both their ratings higher than you. And then you go to Denton Municipal, the same rating as you, basically 230 days. And then finally, I'll go to Benton PUD, Benton, Washington, 103 days cash, barely 100, right? 103 days cash, and again, higher rated than you. So I guess the point here is that cash levels, more is better, but sometimes you find the lower rated utilities will have more cash in some instances, just because they might not have high debt service coverage. But we do find more is better. So then we said, let's do a little bit more research. If you go to our next slide, which is
Can I
slide
ask a quick question,
26.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I did a quick analysis on your chart, which I thought was wonderful, actually. And I looked at rates, their average rate per kilowatt. And, as our function as a board is the rate payers, what they're actually paying. It's great to have cash reserves of 209 days, which I'm not disputing at all. But with the exception of two of the people that gave information about electricity and pricing, because some of them are, I guess there's no public debt, so they're private. They probably are not issuing that information. Rochester is showing at $1.94 per kilowatt, which is crazy. And Denton Municipal Electricity is showing at 42. Independence Power and Light is the highest rate of anyone else on this entire chart. At some point, we need to address the rate for the ratepayers. And it seems like what we're looking at is trying to grow the reserves to protect IPL. And at the same time, I think we need to be focusing on the ratepayers, the owners of this utility. And it's concerning to me that we spent $50,000 on this thing, and not anything to do with you. We spent $50,000 to look at expenses and how we need to have insurance and our reserves and all that good stuff. And we haven't spent a dime. I can't even get a report that shows the average rate within the 200 or 300 mile municipal utilities to say, what is our rate and what are we going to do about reducing our rate to our customers? We talk about COVID and we talk about unemployment. We talked about a lot of things. But the thing that we're not talking about is reducing rates. So thank you so much. At least we got some data that we can't seem to get from IPL. Thank you so much.
So moving to slide 26, the question came up about, will this influence an ability for the utility to come to market to issue debt? And what we did is we looked at the S&P criteria and we said, where are you now? And if we make this adjustment, if we do move lower to lower day cash or lower levels of cash, will it hurt the rating? And what we found is you would still be in the same bin of how S&P grades you for these two metrics. So that tells us, well, that shouldn't be any rating concern for us. We then said, well, what if IPL wants to bring on another rating agency, whether it's Fitch or Moody's, because you do have some borrowing potential, big refundings to do down the road. What happens then? Would they look at that unfavorably? We went through their criteria. They don't necessarily look at cash in some respects, but we basically concluded that we don't feel that the rating would be at risk if you move to a lower level. We do think that it requires a thorough conversation so they understand what's going on and why are you moving to this lower level. It's very concerning to a ratings analyst that a cash level they expected to be X is now less than that, and they wonder what's going on. Is the utility board not approving rates because they don't have the wherewithal to impose rates on their community? So what's going on? But here we think that wouldn't be a problem, just a communication issue. Slide 27 talks about, if you do have this excess, what do you do with it? And, you do have some refundings coming up. The 2010 Bs are the first one that we talked about. They're already past their call date, meaning that you can call those at any time now. You can call them to save some dollars for your ratepayers. We found that if basically we have proposals from several banks, and if we apply the rates that those proposals have, you'd save about 24%, which is $2.6 million. Just by refinancing this like you'd refinance your house. Any dollar you put into it improves that savings. So we ran a scenario where we said, let's take $2.5 million, put that into this transaction so we borrow less from this bank. And that improves that savings from 2.6 million essentially to about $5 million. And that savings percentage goes from 24, basically doubles to close to 50%. So any dollar you put in has a very nice return on it. And then finally, 2 slides later, here we go to our next steps. We're here November 19th in about a month. I think the plan is to bring this forward. I'd be glad to answer any other questions that folks may have.
Go ahead. Hit your button.
I'm sorry. First of all, I want to compliment you. I think this was $50,000 well spent. We spent a lot more money on many other consultants, and we've questioned. But anyway, I think this has been excellent, and I really appreciate it. On slide 45, at the last point, it says, however, as IPL incorporates more power purchase agreements into operations rather than asset ownership, FCC is more relevant metric. My question is, your whole presentation was to reduce risk, or to adjust for risk. So, is it more risky for us to have power purchase agreements or to have asset ownership?
Well, I think 2 things. Some of my clients are looking at it going, I still want to have ownership of something. So if there's a catastrophe, weather related, I could fire up the old unit and I can still serve my load, and things will be okay. So that's, some folks are very hesitant to go the whole purchase power route. So that's one thing. I would say the second thing we've seen is that if you are going to turn green and move in a significant direction towards renewable energy, meaning wind and solar, then the power purchase agreements are typically much more economical to do. There are federal incentives for a solar wind developer where basically they could build it for about 30% less than what a municipal utility can build it. So basically by contracting with a private commercial developer, take a part of a utility scale wind farm and bring that power into the grid, you can save, they're not going to give you all 30% back, but you could probably get a good 10 or 15% cheaper than what IPL can do.
Okay, thank you.
But that's one of those things that's a little risky in the sense that, the renewable industry's done great. So by all means, I think the subsidies should go away. They've done their purpose. But will the Biden administration get rid of renewable incentives? I don't think so, given their...
From some other reports that I've seen, it looks like that there's a movement towards the renewable energies as opposed to power plants being built for coal or gas or whatever. That's not where the direction is going right now. It's really into the renewable energy. Is that what your understanding is?
Yeah, what we've seen, and I point to Michigan and Minnesota, where they have a ton of renewable energy coming in, or mandates for their towns, cities, states. And the local utilities are building what they call peaker units, which are small, 30 to 50 megawatt units. They don't run a whole lot. When I say they don't run a whole lot, they run maybe 10% of the year. But what that allows you to do is that wind energy and the solar comes on and off the system. The wind picks up speed. You have more wind turbine energy coming in. These things can be dialed up like a gas grill, I think, like a Weber grill. And all right, more wind's coming on the system. Let's dial the peaker down. Okay, let's pull it back up again. And it helps balance the load. And they can also be used when you have extreme weather. The peakers can come online and, they can help balance the grid pretty well. But I see a lot of folks not going into a big base load unit, meaning 100, 150 megawatt natural gas unit. Instead, they'll build 1 or 2 peakers and just address that and buy on the market or through power purchases.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to address the gentleman. I share Mr. Land's opinion of your analysis. I truly enjoyed reading it. I wish I'd had a little bit more time to be able to digest it before the meeting. There is a question I have about selling energy. In your experience with the other clients, what is the feasibility of us beginning to produce base load electricity and selling it on the open market? Is that something your clients are entertaining, or is it something that they're trying to get away from?
Well, I think anecdotally, I could just point to one of my clients up in Michigan that is building a large baseload gas plant, 250 megawatts.
Okay.
They've actually scaled it, so now it's 200 megawatts of baseload power and then 50 megawatts of those peaker units. So when they're looking at it, and they are planning on some off-system sales because they think the efficiency of the unit, the heat rate, is going to be such that they can see some revenue and some profit margin on that. So when I look at their budget, they're planning on about $10 to $30 million a year of sales. And you ask them where'd that number come from? They're like, well, we have a smart guy who's a PhD in weather science, and he's figured out that this is what we could do in the year 2046. Okay, so yeah, I asked the question. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure that's true. They went in front of the rating agencies, and of course, the rating agencies last week were like, tell me what that number is and where to come from again. And their concern is that there's this pie in the sky off-system sales number that's going to be used to cover all the risks of the utility. Now, the rising tide raises all ships.
For another question, is there a downside for us to being part of SPP and taking that strategy of trying to sell? Because we'll only be able to sell what they're willing to say we want you to generate. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not 100% an expert on SPP.
I'll take 80% if it.
I'll round up then. Some utilities take that as a strategy of doing that, and there are many what we call joint action agencies that don't own any generating stations. They're just contracting for power in the marketplace, but they're going out years and years to layer on a prudent hedging strategy, and they have some very smart consultants that do it. Usually, it's called the Energy Authority, which is kind of a muni-backed energy trading platform that does that kind of thing for them. But in general, if you look at the statistics behind the integrated marketplace of SPP or a MISO or a PJM, all those power prices have come down. And it's, I think the engineers sometimes cry that their plant isn't running as much, but the CFO is going, but we're getting the power for cheaper than we can generate it. It's kind of a win-win. So that's kind of a trend we're seeing. Thank you.
Any other questions? I want to thank you for your presentation, and I appreciate all the hard work you did on it. I have mixed emotions about it because it tells me we got a lot of money. And then it doesn't tell me what I can do for like Mr. McDonald said, what I can do for my ratepayers. I'm a little upset with this going to Minnesota, Nebraska, someplace else and getting comparisons. That doesn't compare to me to Independence, Missouri. I think we've got, this is a great report, but I think it's ahead of, we don't have a report yet on what our solar's doing and what our wind is doing. We don't have any of that information. So I don't, this is a little ahead of what I can digest it to compare to what we're getting now. Like I said, it's a good report. It tells me we need to do something with the money, and I think it's giving it back to the ratepayers in some way or another. Again, I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we can move on.
This is Jack Looney. I have 3 observations here.
Yeah, Jack.
Under expense risk, when we talk about capital renewal and replacement, I'd like to point out that annually, the utility has many more capital projects proposed than end up in the realized budget. So there's many things that the utility feels needs to be worked on or built that are offset into the future somewhere. Sometime those will add up and will need to be done. So I'm not that it affects the total outcome of this report, but I don't think accepting the moderate level on this particular category accurately represents Power and Light's position. Probably more conservative would be more appropriate since we delayed many things that need to be done. Secondly, just to all board members, if we look at the previous discussion part of expense risk, and many of the comments, how do we get to reducing the rates? How do we get to being more efficient? And when you jump up to a previous chart, I don't have the slide number at the moment, but $340,000 a day to run the utility should be where our focus is. How do we reduce that? Reducing that is a large factor in moving towards efficiency of the utility. I want to just bring that to everybody's attention on that. And that'll conclude my comments for the moment.
Thank you, Jack. Anybody else? Okay, thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the president ready to go to action items. I guess the staff is requesting a motion to support the PFM recommended resiliency and cash balance policy.
Mr. Chairman,
And yes,
I'd like to make a motion.
I have a motion on the floor for action item number 1.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second it.
Wait a
It's
minute,
been
I haven't made the
seconded.
motion yet.
Oh, I thought you made it.
No. I move that PUAB adopt the PUAB rankings of IPL priorities and establish the priorities for IPL for a minimum of 2 years and not change the priorities within that time frame unless there is sufficient documentation presented why a priority should be added or changed.
Well, is your motion on number
On the
1
wrong thing.
on this?
Wasn't it on the priorities?
Nope.
Huh?
The rankings?
No. Not the priority, the PFM report that we just heard.
I'm sorry, I thought it was,
No, we're on action item number 1.
I didn't see that there's any action requested there. Oh, requested, I'm sorry, Larry. Is that the motion?
You want to make that motion?
Sir, I'll be glad to. I move that we,
You got that, Christine? Action item number 1, the motion is seconded by Mark. Any further discussion on it? Hearing none, call for vote.
Jack Looney,
Yes.
Garland Land,
yes.
Joe Zach,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
Yes.
David McDowell,
Sorry.
Yes.
Bridget McCandless,
Yes.
Larry Porter,
Yes. Motion passed. Number 2, requesting a motion to support the PUAB ranking and IPL priorities from Jim Nail.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I hate to be kind of a pain here, but unless my math is incorrect, we should have had 840 votes and we only had 799. I've thought about this and, it looks like we agree on 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But everything else is kind of messed up, and I think it might be messed up because the voting was done incorrectly. Someone did not vote or didn't vote on everything.
Well, I don't imagine they had to. It wasn't a directive. They didn't have to vote if they didn't want to.
Okay.
I hear a motion to approve this
I'll move.
or disapprove it.
I'll move what I just read before. Want me to read it again?
No, motion, requested on the action item number 2,
Yes.
the PUAB ranking of IPL priorities by Jim Nail. I have a motion on the floor. I have a second.
Can you clarify exactly what we're voting on? I'm sorry. I'm
Yes,
not sure I
I'd like to.
Right there
voting
on the bottom,
two.
the
I know what that says.
it's the ranking that we made, right there.
I think.
And so what does that mean that we're voting to do what?
We're supporting it to give to the council.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I believe Mr. Land made a separate, different motion. Is that correct, Mr. Land?
No, I moved that the PUA adopt the PUAB rankings of IPL priorities and establish the priorities for IPL for a minimum of 2 years and not change the priorities within that time frame unless there is sufficient documentation presented why a priority should be added or changed. I think it's important that we
I was
provide.
gonna second first, please. I'm sorry, before discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I need a second. I haven't had a second yet. Motion fails if I don't get a second.
Can we have some discussion, Mr. Chairman?
If I had a second, I would. I don't have a second.
I'll second it just for the sake of having some discussion.
Thank you.
May I begin?
Go ahead, and if you want to start the discussion.
Okay, thank you. As I think we all observed, it's a little confusing the way that we chose to do this. Some of these matters are duplicates, so I found it very hard to rate them for some minor differences, to rate them similarly or more important, less important. I found that to be kind of awkward. Other issues I had with it were, like Power and Light stated in the last meeting, there are some things that may fall down the ranking, but could begin. Data-driven information could begin, even though it doesn't have a high recommendation. You need the data to support the decision, which may, be out. So I found a lot of difficulty in rating this. Maybe why it's not received a reluctant second. I know I put some effort into this, but I'm not sure it's a great product. I think that's going to conclude my part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bridget.
I find it hard to vote on this without seeing what a cohesive document is going to look like. And so this to me is just a list of topics as opposed to a strategic plan. So I wonder if there is a way to take this and then bring us something that actually is a document that we're voting on. This is just a series of ideas.
Thank you, Bridget. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Jack Looney here.
Yeah, Jack.
I also see that perhaps it could be divided into different categories. Some of these are more governing. They must be established before you can move on to many of the others. Others are more should be departmentally rated and let the department move in a direction to resolve. It's just difficult for me to see some of these competing against others. So that's all I have at the moment.
Thank you, Mark.
My concern is pretty much in alignment with Mr. McDowell's, that the instructions that we developed, and I was a part of that too, I understand that, were flawed. We've got duplications amongst the priorities that are very close, and we were not very clear on the fact that everyone needed to register 15 different selections, because when you don't register selections, you're actually skewing the scoring sheet. Whether you intentionally did it or didn't intentionally do it, it's important that we have continuity amongst how we score. The real issue is there should have been 840 entries, 840 scorers, and we ended up with 799. And I think that the scoring right now is flawed. I'd recommend that we look at possibly rescoring it with a better set of instructions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. My only, not only, my problem with it is a lot of these things that we voted on are already in place. They should be. And I was told they're already starting to do some of this stuff. I think it could have been a lot smaller amount of priorities at this time. I see nothing in there. There was nothing in there about the use of funds to the general fund under the Bondurant decision. I think that, again, has to be looked at, and it was one of my priorities. So I'll be voting no on it at this time. Thank you. Any other discussion? Call for vote.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
did we not get a second on this?
You did.
We did get a
Jack seconded.
Okay.
Yeah, Jack Looney seconded.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Call for vote.
Okay. Jack Looney,
Ironically, no.
Brian Land,
Yes.
Joe Zach,
No.
Mark McDonald,
No.
David McDowell,
No.
Bridget McCandless,
No,
Larry Porter,
No. Motion failed. Third motion concerning development of future electric power source from Mr. McDonald. Would you make your motion, Mr. McDonald?
Yes. As soon as I find it. Okay, the first motion I had was per Independence, Missouri City Charter Section 3.169, the PUAB is recommending the necessary action to be taken to determine the most cost-effective and reliable source of energy for the ratepayers of IPL in the future. This would include discontinuing the current combustion turbine operations and begin seeking out baseload electric solution for our energy needs within the constraints of SPP regulations. And basically what that is to get the ball rolling for specifically what the gentleman was talking about. I'd love to be able to be producing energy, and I was not a fan of this in the past, and I acknowledge that. But for us to be able to possibly sell energy and actually enjoy income that would help IPL out. And I think part of the issue is we need to be looking for the future. And I do think our reliance on coal is subject to change fairly quickly. So that's the rationale for my motion.
I second.
What's that, Jeff?
I have a motion on the floor and a second. Any more discussion on it?
Yes, sir. Two items.
Yes.
Jack Looney.
Yeah, Jack.
I think it's just a little bit of word change. There'd be an amendment to the motion. I personally think it's inappropriate to say what what we're asking to be determined that would give the conclusion. I think it should say this would this may include consideration of discontinuing the current combustion turbine operations, rather than it would include.
You want to respond to that, Mark?
I'm good with that. I think the discussion that someone believes that the combustion turbine is going to last 10 years and only cost us $10 million, it's ludicrous. But if we want to still live in that pipe dream, I'm good. It may include getting rid of the combustion turbines, and it may not. I'm good with that.
Sarah, can I amend the motion?
You'll need Jack Looney has made a motion basically to amend the main motion. You'll need a second and vote on the amendment, and then.
Okay, I need a second on your.
Second.
You seconded.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Jack Looney here. I've also got some wordsmithing that needs to be done on the last sentence. We want to include it now, or is it a second amendment?
No, we'll do it now.
Okay, it doesn't seem like it's, the intent is good, but I think the sentence is kind of a broken sentence. It says, and begin seeking out baseload electric solution our energy needs within the constraints of SPP regulations. Mr. McDonald, would you like to reconsider the wording there?
Add the word for. Mr. Looney, if we add the word for, does that take care of it? Seeking out baseload electric solution for
Yes,
our
Bridget,
energy needs?
you have something to say? Yes.
What are we going to do to stack up amendments?
I have.
Jack,
I
you got
have
any
one
more
amendment.
you'd like to give us before we move on?
I'm sorry, that's two. I don't mean to be intrusive. It's just that it's
Meet you.
coming from the entire board, I think it ought to be, it ought to be worded properly. So.
Yeah, it's not a sentence right now.
It's not meant to be a sentence right now. It's just simply to get the facts out and say, is this something you're interested in doing? I have no problem with the amendment.
And the suggestion of putting for before R, I think makes it a complete sentence.
Thank you, Jack. Any more? This is just what I was talking about. Everybody's jabbering. I have a motion to amend it on the floor and a second. All in favor of amending the motion, please vote.
Jack Looney,
Yeah.
can you repeat that, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Garland Land,
Yes.
Joe Zach,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
Yes.
David McDowell,
Yes.
Bridget McCandless,
Say yes. We can't hear you. I'm sorry, hon.
Larry Porter,
Yes. Motion passed. Now, the original motion is on the floor and seconded.
Amended motion.
The amended motion is on the floor and seconded. Any
Mr.
more
Chairman,
discussion on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I ask a question of Mark? So when you talk about base load, are you talking about building a power plant?
Excuse me?
When you talk, for those who are listening in, when you refer to a base load, are you referring to building a power plant?
No, I'm just finding out what's available for us to have a base load item. Right now, what we have is peak load, whereas the CTs, you can either determine that they're going to be useful, but they cannot be used for a long-term basis, in my opinion, if you're going to try and sell it. Base load means something you can count on, it can go towards capacity, it can take care of all those things.
So can you give us an example? If it's not a power plant, what would it be?
I have no idea. This motion is to find out what is the most cost-effective and the best option for IPO.
Well, I mean, you're presenting the motion for a base load. I think we need to understand what your intent is for a base load.
That's up to the staff and the IPL.
Yeah, I think the engineers would know more about than I do.
Well, usually, my understanding is a base load is a power plant. If I'm incorrect, I'd like to know that. But that's usually the way the terminology is.
There might be another power plant. We don't know. It's up to the engineers.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Jack.
Jack, I'm sorry. I think the way it's worded leaves it open for all considerations, and that's the way any study or determination should be made.
That's
Nothing
right.
should be excluded. Now that the people that do the study may exclude some things because of cost effectiveness or green or whatever, but I think it's worded just fine.
I'm just trying to understand what is the breadth of the definition of a base load. I don't know.
I think that's for another meeting. I call for a vote, please.
Jack Looney,
Yes.
Garland,
No.
Joe Zach,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
Yes.
David McDowell,
Yes.
Bridget McCandless,
Abstain.
On what
Mary
grounds?
Porter.
Yes.
On what grounds? And that I haven't been on the board long enough to have heard any of the discussions that you've had the privilege of on the combustion turbine, so I just don't feel like I have enough information to vote on this.
Thank you. Motion passed. Most concerning endorsement of the City Council resolution establishing priorities for the use of any surplus in the IPL Enterprise Fund. Mr. McDonald again.
Yes. My motion is that with section 3.16, item 9, that we endorse bill number 20-809 that was attempted to be introduced last week, but I think will be reintroduced this coming week. And I'd like to add into it, just with the resolution, that the city consider using $22 million as the figure to go for reduction of debt and also to make benefit to the ratepayers.
Go through your motion again, please, and give a second.
Second.
Mr. Chairman,
Harlan?
I'd like to move a substitute motion. Resolve that the priority be given to use surplus funds to fund the PUAB. Well, actually, we didn't vote on the strategic plan priorities, so that doesn't make any sense any longer. That we use the fund to provide funding for any IPL costs that are needed to reduce ongoing costs of IPL. For example, the need for underground lines or the tree trimming. That we use some of the funds for the bond to reduce bond holdings, and also that we use some of the funds, probably a very small amount, to continue helping our residents who are been affected, both the residents and business owners who've been affected by COVID-19. That doesn't need to be a large amount of money, but we've had a lot of discussion in the city council meeting about our business owners who have been affected by COVID-19. And I think that we ought to recognize that need with the surplus funds.
I have one motion on the floor and a second. Should I not vote on that first?
No, Garland, Mr. Land was amending the main motion to include his.
No, he said he wanted to make a motion.
I'm offering a substitute motion.
Substitute motion.
He needs a second to substitute the main motion.
You have a second?
A second for purposes of discussion. Can I have a clarification? I'm sorry, on the first motion. Mr. McDonald,
Do you have a microphone on?
I do. You recommended $22 million, but
Yes.
the discussion that we just had with our consultant was the recommendation that we had $9 million of excess. If we took his recommended level of $67 million in reserves, plus or minus the 10%, that bandwidth, you're picking the lower end of the band.
Yes.
Even
And
though-
they recommended 15.7 million, and it had a band of 10% one way or the other. And I'm suggesting that we go with the band lower. That's the suggestion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion on the motion?
Yes, sir, Jack Looney. If we're talking about amending it with Mr. Land's proposal that was attached to the agenda today, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues. The very first one is given use of surplus funds for strategic plan priorities. At the moment, we don't have one.
I'm
the
sorry,
very
Jack, I
last-
don't have a motion from Mr. Land on the agenda.
Am I out of order? I'm sorry.
It was in our packet.
Huh? I don't have that on an action item.
It was in the handout.
Oh, now I'm getting it. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, there is. Was that a go ahead for me?
Yes.
Okay. The first priority, there isn't a strategic plan priority at the moment. And lastly is an open door. The very last item says other uses of the surplus funds be considered after the above funding priorities are met. That's an open door. That doesn't tie it down to power wide. It's not specific enough. It's a phrase that can be misused. The intent's good, but the wording's not there.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond?
Yes.
Jack, I didn't actually move what was handed out because we did not pass the priorities. So what was handed out, I did not include that first sentence, and I did not include the last sentence. I only included using the surplus funds to reduce the ongoing IPL costs and make operational improvements. And I also included to use the surplus funds for IPL municipal bond holdings, and I included using the funds to assist residents and business owners who have been affected by COVID-19. Those are the three parts of my motion.
I stand corrected. By the time I caught up, it sounded like you were reading through this. So that was my error, and my objection is withdrawn.
Thank you, Jack. Garland, I have a problem with the resolved priority given to use surplus funds to assist residents and business owners in the need because of the effect of COVID-19. It's my understanding, assist the residents. We're already doing that with funds that we've got from the, what was that? CSL.
Yeah, those funds are going to run out the end of December, but the need is going to continue into next year. So in talking to Mr. Cowan, he said that probably it would be sufficient for $100,000 to help the residents. I think we ought to probably double that to help the restaurant owners and other businesses. Maybe a couple $100,000 would be sufficient to help both the residents and the business owners.
Are you associated with CSL?
Yes, I'm on the board.
You're on the board? I think that's a conflict of interest.
I just asked for information, that's all, in case it came up in the discussion. I know that isn't part of the motion. in terms of the amount.
Well, that's what it is right here. He said
No, I didn't, the amount
surplus
isn't,
funds to assist residents, and we're already doing it with the CSL.
the amount isn't in the motion. The amount isn't in the motion. I'm just offering that as information.
Okay. Any more discussion? Call for vote.
Mr. Chairman, what are we voting on?
Yes, that's what I want to know.
We're voting on Garland's replacement, or what do you call it?
Yeah, so what we're doing is, Mr. Land has substituted the prioritization at the end of the draft resolution Mr. McDonald gave us. He gave us 2 priorities. Mr. Land has given us 3, and it's in your packet, it's the middle 3.
Okay,
So that's what we're substituting this
that's what we're voting on.
So we're voting on Mr. Land's amendment or Mr. Land's substitution?
Substitution.
Okay.
Yeah.
My hearing's not good.
Call for vote.
Jack Looney,
No.
could you repeat that, please?
No.
No.
Garland Land,
Yes.
Joe Zach,
No.
Mark McDonald,
No.
David McDowell,
No.
Bridget McCandless,
I'm gonna vote no on this.
Larry Porter,
No. Motion failed. Now, a call for vote on the Mr. McDonald's motion.
Can I ask a question on that before the vote,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. McDonald, would you consider changing the amount so that we could at least recognize the recommendation by our financial advisors rather than pick the lowest edge of the margin, which gives us no wiggle room? Instead, pick the higher end of the bandwidth, still allowing $10 million for your resolution, rather than the 22 million, just because I feel like there is so much uncertainty about what will happen in the next 12 months. Certainly, we can revisit it again when we have better financial information. If there's still surplus, then we make a second determination.
I'd like to respond to that. I appreciate your comments, and not being on the board very long, you will realize that what we're talking about here is increasing the reserves from 63 days in less than 1 year, from 63 days to 90 days. Now, this new proposal that we endorsed, and I understand that, is 209 days. We're actually tripling, almost just tripling the amount of reserves that they had previous to this motion. Some of the things that I think that they're built into their equation, I think I understand. I have a real problem with understanding how are these dollars going to be available and who has the authority of withdrawing those funds that are available for whatever crisis may happen. That's what my concern is. So when I say that, you got a question?
I'm just trying to follow.
Or hopefully you're not hard of hearing like me. We're in trouble. The issue is, I guess what I'm saying is, no, I don't think we should reduce the amount because of the fact that we're increasing the amount of reserves that IPL will be holding that by 300% is more than enough reserves that they currently have. Does that answer that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more discussion? Call for vote.
Jack Looney,
Yes.
Garland Land,
No.
Joe Zach,
Yes.
Mark McDonald,
Yes.
David McDowell,
Yes.
Bridget McCandless,
No.
Larry Porter,
Yes. Motion passed. Where am I at now? Okay, October financial and September and October dashboard. Finance people?
So I'm on the call if there's any specific questions you might have with this. I will say, starting in January, for at least the IPL funds, we will start showing the fund balance in the same format that was shown by PFM, just for consistency.
Any questions on the financial report for September, October dashboards?
Yeah, I had,
Mr. Lamb?
I think that this question comes up on all three of them, but I'm just looking at the sanitary sewer one. The number of customers in September is 45,000, and in October it's 90,000. And I think that shows up in all three of them, where it's twice as much in the second month as it is in the first month, in the corresponding month. And I just wonder if there's some type of accounting, some type of error there.
Dan Montgomery, Water Systems Director. I was noticing the same thing, Mr. Land. And what has been presented is a physical year-to-date response. So what that is the first 3 months are added up, and then the fourth month is another month added onto that. So that may not be how you would expect to see it, and we may need to change those on future ones. So if you notice on all the information that was sent out today, everything is for September is June or July, August, September, 3 months. Add September to October to that, and you'll get the number that goes to October. So that is what caused. I looked at the water side. I wasn't looking at theirs, but I noticed the exact same thing. For instance, it shows 44,718 customers, which is more and true what is real.
Right.
But the other number has 3 customers added up the 3 previous months. So we'll have to make some corrections to this in the future so it makes a little more sense to you.
Yeah, appreciate that. Okay. Maybe while you're on the, I guess this is the customer service delinquent dashboard. Would that be yours also?
I can attempt. And also Brian's on it.
It's both the electric and the water. I guess I don't understand where it talks about electric correct reads and then incorrect reads. This is the first time we've seen this kind of report, and I find it kind of interesting. What does it mean to have a correct read and an incorrect read? And then the numbers have gone up considerably between the September and October. Can you help us understand what it means between a correct read?
Brian, you can jump in here anytime, but my understanding would be that the same thing happened there. They've added the 3 previous months to get the September value. If you take the difference between 522 and 368 for correct reads, for instance, that's the actual number of reads in October. So it's not in a form that makes sense to you probably, and it didn't to me either. So we'll make some corrections to that. Brian, can you jump in here? So Jim's taking
Mr. Chairman, if I can address.
Yes.
On the correct reads and incorrect reads, in our system, if a bill, let's say it looks like maybe the meter rolled over, so the reading comes out odd, or if there's certain parameters in our billing system that'll trigger a recheck to make sure it's the correct value. Another instance could be if a customer calls and says, I don't think you read my meter right, can you check it again? Any of those circumstances, one of our staff will go out and recheck the reading for that meter. What you see here is out of and this is a cumulative number. So in September, we had 671 rechecks, and out of those 671, 368 of them were actually correct, and 303 they found that there was an error, whether somebody had transposed a number or written down a number wrong. So that's what those rechecks represent.
I see. Okay.
So just for an example, I just subtracted those two numbers. So for the month of October, there was between September and October, there's 154 correct reads, and incorrect reads would have been 51 of those when we went back out and rechecked them. So we'll probably, if that makes more sense to break them out monthly, we'll have to talk about that. If that is confusing, because otherwise you have to do the math every time that
Yeah.
you want to compare something. And some numbers work well for that. For instance, if I look up here at the numbers, you might say that year to date, 17% of the bills have been estimated bills. I just did the math to figure that out. And the same thing goes but for instance, in the last month, if you did all the subtraction, it'd say half the people got estimated last month because of the, so that's the type of, I would assume you would need to know the percentages or something that would give you a value to have a feel for what was going on, is my understanding of a benchmark. So we'll have to work on those as a group. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I don't
Thank
want
you.
to speak for everybody else.
Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
First of all, and apologize for my hearing, but did someone address the estimated bills year to date? 66,000 estimated bills, is that correct?
No, we just talked about that.
Did you just talk about it?
When I did the math,
Excuse me?
when I did the math, I was trying to understand what that meant percentage wise, and that was 17% of the bills were estimated bills
So 17% of the bills were estimated?
year to date. That's my interpretation of these numbers right now.
I thought we addressed this previously.
I thought this said up top.
Yeah, I got it.
Date.
But I thought we were going to hire a temporary staff to read the meters, to take care of the problems of the customers. I read on Next Door Neighbors, people alleging having incredible problems with their bills, and I don't know what's real and what's not, just like Mr. Nail said, but to have 17% of our bills estimated is unconscionable. Either maybe you guys need to go out and read meters. I don't know. Somebody needs to read these meters to give our customers a fair shake. They're having a hard enough time getting by with the rates that we charge them, and then we don't read their meters. Last time I thought we were going to hire a temporary firm to go out there and read them. Did I hear that wrong?
Mr. Chairman, can I address?
Yes.
Jim Dale, Director IPL. We have reached out to the union, and from the hall, we've got four temporary workers. During the month of October, we were able to get them on board, get them through the hiring process, train them, and they have started assisting in doing those reads. During that same time, we also had a number of our meter readers that had to quarantine for COVID exposures and that sort of thing. So that's why the number jumped up
I
in
understand
October.
that.
But we
need to have backup plans.
We
when you had a lineman that go down with COVID, you do that, right? I mean, we have to make sure the power turns on. This is just as important as making sure we have linemen and someone that can oil up the CTs or whatever we have. Guys, our customers, our ratepayers are our boss. And it's so disappointing that we can't even give them an accurate bill. So that's my one question. And I hope that the 4 people are going to be enough. And if it's not, we need to get more. The other thing was, hopefully Mr. Kidney's still on. Can you explain how you can have a negative total unrestricted reserve available for WPC?
It's math.
This is 2 months in a row.
I'm sorry.
It's happening 2 months in a row. It's gone down from over $1 million in the negative excess reserve account. I would think that would be zeroed out, and we would actually be drawing down on the operating reserves by that same amount. Would we not?
Well, one of the things that you see in that are those capital projects in progress. So we aren't spending that $10 million over a couple months. So that $10 million is our expenses that take several months to actually, or a year or so to actually do. So that non-restricted resources available is showing a snapshot as of right now if we were to spend that full $10.7 million.
I'm just recommending, as a finance person, you can't have negative excess reserves. Pure and simple. You need to be drawing it down from the regular reserves if that's what we're going to do. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Any other questions, finance? Water department? Nothing? Huh?
Are you talking about the?
No. You want to give a report on anything you got going?
Are you talking about the utility bill pay? Have we moved on, Larry? Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's fine.
Yes, there was in your packet, there was a yellow thing, but
Yeah.
also when you came in today, there was a handout there was a memo that I had sent to the city manager's office at the end of last month. So at the end of every month is when we get an update on this material. Okay. So just try to give you an update. I'll just do it really quick. For the month, it's went up to 2.1 million for the people that were in the rears. That's about 11% of our customers. And one of the things we started shutting off this month, and the idea was and I think I talked about at the last meeting, the idea was to drive everybody to that CARES money that was administered by the CSL. And just to give you a feel for how that's going, I have new numbers from the sheet that you picked up today when you walked in. Because the school district had sent out a robocall and notified all their students and their parents, of course, then we've had 1,815 applications to date, and that's 1.1 million of the 2.2 million. But now, since they started, that's about a $620 a person average on what they've been receiving. But as of today, we had 2,825. And so we're trying to keep up with CSL. We're probably within a day of everything that comes in. Our staff has been doing a great job. I took the 2,825, multiplied it times 620 to kind of get a feel for where we are. And it looks like we're at $1.75 million of the 2.2. So we had 140 new applications last night. So I'm thinking these robocalls are going to get this money spent. Kind of like Mr. Land was speaking of earlier. So just to give you a feel, so Doug Cowan believes that by December 30th, we'll have spent that money, which is the due date.
Okay. That's the due date.
That's the date that we have to have the money spent.
That's my understanding. There'll be
the CARES money has to be used up by December 30th.
There'll be application for more. Is that right? I understand there'll be applications for more money.
Yes, I think that would be better answered by city manager. I think there is a request.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some members of the council, from a policy perspective, are trying to demonstrate the need that there is a need for more additional funds. As this stuff runs out at the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from Mr.?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. If we've gotten these delinquencies, are we forwarding these folks to CSL? Then how in the world are we using COVID money to update a sound system when we got people out there that can't pay their darn bill? Tell me, how does that work? Did you communicate that to the city manager?
So the revised budget was approved by the city council Monday night for the CARES dollars, and all those items were approved by the city council.
Okay, so I think that's the important thing that we all should learn, that if the city council approves it, then we don't have to worry about folks that have COVID issues to pay their bills.
I would say that I know members of the city council are advocating for additional dollars that could be used for for utility assistance going forward as this money expires.
Adam, I'm not pointing this towards you, but it's clear priorities are in the wrong place.
Anything else, Mark?
Are we going to do the upcoming agenda item?
I'm going to address them at this point. And what I'm addressing is that I've marked them off on my list here. We can't address all these at these meetings that you're talking about. Number one, because we don't know where we're going to be in December. We don't even know where we'll meet. Upcoming agenda items, I would request that we table these items at this time, and I'm going to advise the council or the board. If you have anything you want to put on the agenda, I would at this time appreciate you would give it to me, and I will relay it to Christina, and we will sit down together and judge the agenda of what can be on there and how much time we have to do it. What'd you have? You had something else?
I would just request the one I have on there for Lee Summit water contract because of the nature of the contract that somebody put that on there. I appreciate that.
We're going to take it off.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't know whether we need to subpoena the finance department, but we've been waiting 6 months, over 6 months, for a detailed listing of all the IPL non-operating expenditures from 2019 to 2020. There should be no reason why we can't get that information.
Mark, if you give me a minute, I was going to address that.
Okay, good.
I've been in contact with the legal department. Sarah, I told you, I'd be asking you about a subpoena power, how we operate that, and how we do it. Give her a mic.
According to, I took a look at the charter, Mr. Chairman, and section 3.16, one of the powers or duties that the board has is to subpoena witnesses to testify and compel the production of documents and other effects as evidence. I do think this is in relation to any sort of investigation that the board wants to look into as far as the public utilities. So that's your power, the actual process of serving a subpoena. It would be a document that would be served on to whomever you wish to come here. Obviously, it would be within the city limits. You can't subpoena, Joe Blow down the street. So it would be something, a document or evidence that you want to present and
All I really want is a stupid report. Our ratepayers, let me finish. Our ratepayers deserve a report to find out how much they're actually financing up and beyond the electric service that they're using in their homes. Right now, we don't have a clue how much is going to different organizations, going to different projects, going to different items, and our ratepayers are paying the bill without their own knowledge. Folks, I don't know what you would call it, but it seems like taxation. We're taxing these folks on stuff they have no input on. Same thing goes for rates. We've been waiting for Mr. McDowell that left. We've been waiting for comparable rates. Heck, I have to use somebody else's analysis to try and get a feel for how our rates compare with the rest of the world. We still don't have it. I hope that this message gets to our council that we're not getting the support that we're asking for. Thank you.
Real quick, Mark, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And as I've been told, and this is the problem that the ratepayers have with this, we talk about transparency, but yet we're not producing transparency. They don't know what's going on, and they're ratepayers. They should be, and we should be more transparent. And if you want to address that, finance man, or you want,
Mr. Chair, I will.
you
If you
will.
would, please. There's a couple. I've been making some notes here. So first to Mr. McDonald's question. When this originally came up, we had a rather large report that the Finance Administration Department had produced that we were ready to provide to this board. However, our concern was that there was a lot of information in there that was not particularly useful, and it did not speak maybe directly to what the question was. I think that's why at the last meeting, Jim may have asked for some clarification about that. I'm trying to remember that, if that's right. And I know he has some information on that today, if we want to, if you want us to hand that out, or we can stick to this coming up in the next meeting.
Can I respond?
The other item, there was a question about CARES funds, and I know the request the city had made was far in excess of what we actually received, because we did recognize that there was a significant need that we had as a community in a lot of different ways. So our request was much higher than what we actually received. The administration of that program, there's a capacity issue, and being able to administer that program and spend that money down, given the deadline of the 30th. So that was also part of the what drove the budget that allocated that certain amount to utility assistance. The last thing, sorry, is you had asked earlier about the PFM contract. That
The what?
you asked about the contract with the
Okay.
PFM, and so I just wanted to bring this up right before the meeting concluded. That went to the city council as a report, as far as these are all our contracts that were authorized in July, and that report went to the city council on August 17th. So there's a report that summarizes, all those contracts. That was a rather large report, if memory serves, because that was kind of right. July is the first month of the fiscal year, so there was a lot of spending and getting ready for the year that occurred at that time. And in fact, I think at that meeting, that particular item was questioned by the city council, and we explained what it was at that time. I'm going off of memory off that part, but anyway, it was August 17th.
Okay. Can I respond? I thought the report was fantastic. I think, I don't know how much these things cost, but it gave us more information than we've had, I want to say, years. I think the gentleman did an excellent job explaining it. That's not the point. The point was we're just kind of in the dark on it, and that was my concern. Back to the unacceptable delays. I'm going to ask you a question. You look this up where it says upcoming agenda items. It says Sunshine Law Training, December. Solar farms, December. Water main replacement, December. Lee Summit water contract, December. Then we get to IPL municipal comparison, nothing. Then we get to the detailed listing that we've been asking for 6 months, nothing. And then we get to Mr. McDowell's thing about municipal utilities, nothing. I'm just trying to ask for the reasonable person so we can communicate with the ratepayers how we stand. I mean, it was pretty clear when we looked at the report on rates that they gave us, but I don't know if that's going to be the same companies, I guess they're companies, same utilities as what we had before. Folks, it's unacceptable that this thing took 6 months. When you ask a question in the 5th month, where was the 1st month? That's when the question should have been for clarification on the request. And that's the only thing. Just be reasonable. That's all I ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I want to notify the board. I will be giving a report to the city council on July the 1st, end of my term, on what progress we've made and what we have failed at. And I'm going to give that to the city scene 7 and to the Independence Examiner. Also, at that time, we'll be in our, I hope we'll be out of COVID at that time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We kind of left in limbo the whole priority thing. We chose not to endorse the priorities, I think for different reasons. I guess what I would encourage the staff, I think we basically laid out some good ideas for the strategic plan. They aren't a strategic plan, as Bridget indicated, but they are ideas. And there are duplicates in there. We understand that, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it happened. I guess what I would suggest is that the staff go ahead and flesh out those ideas into a plan. And in terms of, what a plan would be in terms of timelines, resources required, who is the point person for each of the ideas, and flesh out a real plan. And you bring that back. I don't think we need to have priorities. I don't know why we even had to have the priorities, because you're going to be working on all of those things over time. But I think you've got enough direction from the board as to what we think is important. And I would just encourage you to go ahead and move forward with using those ideas to develop a plan.
Thank you, Gronin. Meeting's adjourned.
Better on that, at least when the contract.